Once a year, on the holiest day in the entire calendar of ancient Israel, the day when the nation fasted and confessed and stood in absolute dread before its God, the high priest did something that should stop you cold. He took two identical goats. He stood them at the door of the tent where the presence of God was said to dwell, and he cast lots over them, two markers drawn out of a box, and by pure chance, one goat was chosen for the Lord, to be killed, and its blood carried into the holiest room in the world. And the other goat was chosen for someone else, someone with a name. The priest laid both his hands on the head of that second goat, and he pressed down, and he confessed over it every sin the nation had committed in the whole year, all the guilt, all the blood, all the filth, speaking it out loud into the animal until, in the imagination of everyone watching, that goat was carrying the entire wickedness of a people on its back. And then he sent it away, out through the gate, out past the last houses, out into the wilderness, into the barren, cracked desert where nothing lives, led by a man who walked it deep into the wasteland and let it go. And the name on the lot, the name of the one that goat was sent to, the name written in the law of Moses in the 16th chapter of the Book of Leviticus, was not the name of God. It was the name of a demon. His name was Azazel. Sit with that for a moment, because it is one of the strangest facts hiding in plain sight inside the Bible, and almost no one has ever had it pointed out to them. On the single most sacred day of the Hebrew year, the Day of Atonement, the day the whole religion was built to make the people clean, the ritual at the very center of it sends a goat, loaded with the sins of the nation, out into the desert to a being called Azazel. The text says it plainly: one lot for the Lord, one lot for Azazel. Two goats, two destinations. One goes up to heaven in blood and smoke, and one walks out, alive, into the empty land, carrying the garbage of a whole people to a place and to a name that the law will not fully explain to you. And for 2,000 years, readers have stared at that word, Azazel, and asked the same question: who is he? Why does he get a goat? Why does the holiest day in the Bible have a demon standing at the other end of it? Tonight I am going to answer that, and I am going to do it honestly, from the actual texts, the way this channel always does, with the seams and the disagreements left in, because the honest version of this story is far stranger than any invented one. But I have to warn you at the start. To understand why a goat is sent into the desert to Azazel, you have to leave the book of Leviticus and open a much older, much darker book, a book that was cut out of most Bibles and buried for 1,000 years, the Book of Enoch. Because in that book, Azazel is not a mystery word. He is a person. He is one of the angels who came down. And what he did and what was done to him is the reason a goat walks into the wilderness every year on the Day of Atonement to this very day. So here is what I am going to show you, and I want you to hold all of it, because every piece is going to come back. I am going to show you who Azazel actually was among the 200 who descended, and why, out of all of them, his name is the one the ancient world could not stop saying. I am going to show you the two things he taught the human race, one of them obvious, and one of them so subtle you have never once thought of it as a sin, and how between them they changed what it means to be human. I am going to show you the sentence that heaven passed on him, a sentence so specific, so physical, that when you hear it, you will feel the desert heat on your own skin, bound hand and foot in a pit in the wilderness with his face covered so he can never see light again. And then, at the very end, I am going to walk you back into that temple in Jerusalem, to the two goats and the lots and the name on the marker, and I am going to show you that the holiest ritual in the Hebrew Bible is, when you understand it, a reenactment of the punishment of a fallen angel. That every year, on the Day of Atonement, Israel was sending its sin back to the one who first taught it. Stay to the end for that, because when the goat and the pit line up, when you see that the desert the goat walks into is the same desert Azazel was thrown into, you are going to understand that these are not two unrelated stories. They are one story, remembered in two books, and it has been standing in your Bible the whole time, waiting. And I want to hand you one small thing to carry, one detail, because it is going to detonate at the finish. Hold on to the color red, a single scarlet thread. Remember that when the goat was sent to Azazel, the tradition says the priests tied a strip of crimson wool, and remember that they watched it every year, waiting to see whether it would change. Keep the red thread. We end there. And here is the promise I am making you, plainly, so you can hold me to it. By the end of this film, you will understand 4 things you almost certainly do not understand right now. You will understand why, out of 200 rebel angels, this one became the face of all evil. You will understand why the two things he taught, and I will name them soon, are still, at this very hour, the two forces that most shape and most damage the world you live in. You will understand what heaven actually did to him, the exact and physical horror of the sentence, and why it fits his crime like a key fits a lock. And you will understand the thing almost no reader of the Bible has ever had explained, why the holiest day in all of Scripture ends with a goat walking into the desert toward a demon, and what that goat was really doing. 4 payoffs, and the 4th is the one that will keep you here, because when the goat and the pit finally line up, the ground is going to move. Do not leave before the goat reaches the cliff. Now, let us go back to the beginning of him. Not to the desert, not to the temple, but to the mountain, where he swore an oath. If you have walked this channel before, you have already stood on that mountain, and you know its name. Mount Hermon, the great cold peak in the far north, where the land of the Bible reaches up toward the sky. And you know what happened there, because we have watched it happen, in the very first story this channel ever told. In the days of a man named Jared, whose name itself means descent, the ones the Book of Enoch calls the Watchers came down, 200 of them, angelic beings, sons of God, and they looked at the daughters of men, and they wanted them, and their leader was afraid to bear the guilt alone, so he made them all swear an oath together, bound by mutual curse, that they would go through with it as one. 200 spirits, standing on the summit of Hermon, swearing to break the boundary between heaven and earth. And they came down, and they took wives, and they taught mankind the things that heaven had never meant for it to have. That is the story of the Watchers, and if you have not seen it, it is waiting for you, and it is the ground this whole episode stands on. Stand on that summit for a moment before we go on, because I want you to see it the way the old book sees it. It is high and cold, and the air is thin, and below the peak the whole land rolls away, green and unsuspecting under the 200 as they gather. They are not men. Do not picture men. Picture beings of fire and intelligence, spirits who had stood, some of them, in the councils of heaven, who knew the courses of the stars because they had helped set them turning, looking down now at the daughters of men with a hunger no spirit was ever meant to feel. And their leader says the thing that gives the whole scene its awful human texture. I fear, he says, that you will not agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. He is afraid. The leader of the rebellion is afraid to carry the guilt alone, and so he binds the others to him by oath, so that if they are all guilty together, perhaps no single one of them can be fully blamed. It is the oldest cowardice in the world, the crime committed by committee so that no one has to own it. And they swear, 200 of them, on the mountain, bound by a mutual curse. And then they step off the edge of everything heaven had drawn as a boundary, and they come down. And somewhere in that 200, sworn like the rest, is the one we are following tonight, Azazel. Whatever fear the leader felt, Azazel does not seem to have shared it, because when they reach the ground, while the others are taking wives, he goes straight to the forge and to the jewel box, and he begins, immediately, to teach. But tonight we are not looking at the 200 as a crowd. Tonight we are pulling one figure out of that crowd, one name, and we are following him all the way down, because among all the Watchers, the ancient world fixed on one of them as the worst. Not the leader, the second, the one whose name became a byword for the whole catastrophe. When the Book of Enoch reaches the moment of judgment, when it lists what went wrong and who is to blame, it does something remarkable. It does not spread the guilt evenly across the 200. It points with its whole hand at one of them. The whole earth has been corrupted, the text says, through the works that were taught by Azazel. To him ascribe all sin. To him ascribe all sin. Out of 200 rebel angels, the book hands the entire ruin of the world to one. And you have to ask why. What did this one do that the others did not? What did Azazel teach that was so poisonous that heaven would write his name over the wreckage of the whole human race? That is the first thing we have to understand, and the answer comes in 2 parts, and the second part is the one that will surprise you. Let me give you the Watcher himself first. In the Book of Enoch, the leader of the 200 is a being named Senjaza, and he is the one who organizes the oath, the one who is afraid, the general of the descent. But right behind him, named second, sometimes named alongside him, as if the two of them share the command, is Azazel. In some of the oldest layers of the text, his name appears as Azazel, and scholars who study these traditions think Azazel and Azazel are the same being wearing 2 spellings, one older, one that won out. And where Senjaza is the leader who takes the women, Azazel is something else. Azazel is the teacher. Azazel is the one who opens the armory. Semjaza wanted the daughters of men. Azazel wanted to hand mankind the knowledge of the gods. And it is the knowledge, far more than the lust, that the ancient world could never forgive, because the women die, and the giants die, and the flood washes the bodies away. But the knowledge stays. The knowledge is still here. You are using some of it right now. That is why they could not stop saying his name, because Semjaza's sin drowned in the flood. Azazel's sin never did. And here is the thing you have to understand about that. Because the Watchers did not only descend, they divided up the work. The Book of Enoch keeps a kind of roll call, a list of who taught what, and it reads like the syllabus of a forbidden university, each fallen instructor with his own department. One of them, named Semjaza, the leader, taught enchantments and the cutting of roots, the old sorcery of the herb and the spell. Another, Armoros, taught the resolving of enchantments, the counterspell, the breaking of the charm. One named Barakajal taught astrology, the reading of fate and the wheeling of the planets. One called Kokabel taught the constellations, the naming and the worship of the stars. One named Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds, the reading of the weather as omen. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. Sariel taught the course of the moon. Do you hear what that list is? It is the birth of astrology, of divination, of sorcery, of every attempt the human race has ever made to steal the future and command the unseen without permission. The Watchers handed down the whole dark curriculum of magic, each one his own subject, and the ancient world remembered every professor by name. But over all of them, at the head of the list, above even Semjaza the leader, stands Azazel, and his subjects are different. His subjects are not the reading of stars or the cutting of roots. His subjects are iron and beauty, and that is the tell. Because the enchantments and the astrology were secret arts, the property of a few priests and sorcerers, but the sword and the mirror were for everyone. What Azazel taught did not stay in the temple of the magician. It went into every hand and onto every face. That is why, when the reckoning comes, the book does not write Semjaza's name over the ruined world, or Barakajal's, or Kokabel's. It writes Azazel's. His curriculum was the one that spread to the whole species and never stopped spreading. So what did he teach? The Book of Enoch is very specific, and I'm going to read it to you the way the old translation gives it, because the plainness of it is part of the horror. And Azazel taught men to make swords, and knives, and shields, and breastplates. Read that again and feel how ordinary it sounds and how enormous it actually is. Swords, knives, shields, breastplates. Azazel is the one, in this ancient memory, who taught the human race how to make war. Not anger, not violence. Humanity had those already. Cain killed Abel with his bare hands or a stone long before Hermon. What Azazel taught was the technology of killing, the forged edge, the sharpened metal that turns a strong man into an unstoppable one, the blade that a small man can use to kill a big man, the armor that lets you walk into the place where the killing is and come back out. He taught the manufacture of death. He took the working of metal, which could have built plows and cities, and he bent it, first toward the sword. And once a people knows how to forge a sword, it cannot unknow it. Every war since the beginning of recorded history has been fought, in a sense, with Azazel's curriculum. That is the first gift, the armory. Hold it, because it is the obvious one, the one you would guess, and it is not the one that made him the face of all sin. Here is the second thing he taught, and I want you to watch closely, because you have never once thought of this as evil, and the Book of Enoch puts it in the very same breath as the swords. He taught them, the text says, the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets, and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. Stop. Read that list again. Bracelets, ornaments, the use of antimony, which is the black powder the ancient world ground up and painted around the eyes, the original eyeliner, the darkening of the lids to make the eyes enormous and striking, the beautifying of the eyelids, costly stones, the jewels, the gems set in gold, coloring tinctures, the dyes, the paints, the cosmetics, the whole art of adornment. Azazel, in the same list as the sword, is credited with teaching the human race how to make itself beautiful, how to paint the face, how to drape the body in gold and jewels, how to turn a person into an object of desire. And you are, right now, feeling the resistance, because this does not sound like a sin. A sword is a sin, you think. But eyeliner, bracelets, making yourself attractive, where is the evil in that? And that resistance you are feeling is exactly the thing the Book of Enoch is trying to show you, because to the ancient mind, these two teachings were not opposites at all. They were the same teaching. They were both ways of taking something God had made and weaponizing it. The sword weaponizes the metal of the earth. The paint weaponizes the human face. One arms the hand for killing. The other arms the body for seduction. And the text is explicit about what the second one did, because right after the list of ornaments and antimony and tinctures, it says, "And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and became corrupt in all their ways." The cosmetics were not innocent in this telling. They were the tools of the corruption. The watchers taught the daughters of men to make themselves irresistible, and the world dissolved into lust and vanity and endless want, and something in the human heart was rearranged that has never been set back. Because think about it. Think about what a mirror does to you. Before the mirror, before the paint, a person simply was their face, the way an animal simply is its face, unaware of it, wearing it without thought. The moment you can paint the face, you can also judge the face. You can see it as a thing that could be better, a thing that is competing, a thing that is winning or losing against every other face in the room. The cosmetic does not only decorate, it teaches you to see yourself from the outside, as an object, as a surface to be improved and displayed and ranked, and that single shift in the way a human being regards their own body is the seed of an entire garden of misery. Vanity, envy, the endless gnawing comparison, the seduction that uses the body as a lure and then discards it, the whole ocean of human unhappiness that flows out of the need to be looked at, out of measuring your face and your body against someone else's, out of dressing to be wanted and then feeling worthless when you are not. The ancient world looked at all of that, and it traced it back to a single source. It said, "An angel came down and taught us this. His name was Azazel. He taught us the blade and he taught us the mirror. And between the two of them, the fear of death and the hunger to be desired, he had the whole human race by the throat." And notice, both of his gifts do the same thing. The sword turns the body into a target. The mirror turns the body into a display. Both of them take the living human person and make it into an object, a thing to be used, a thing to be looked at, a thing to be wanted or destroyed. That is the signature of Azazel across everything he taught. He is the angel who taught mankind to treat the human being as an object. And once you have seen that, you cannot unsee it, and you will find his fingerprints in places in your own life you would never have thought to look. And I want you to stay with the sword a moment longer, because it is easy to hear the word and move past it, and the ancient world did not move past it. Think about what actually changes in a human society the first time someone forges a blade. Before the sword, strength was the ceiling. The strongest man in the valley was the most dangerous man in the valley, and there was a rough justice in that, a limit set by muscle and bone. The sword erases the limit. The sword lets the weak kill the strong, lets 10 men kill 100, lets a king who has never lifted a plow arm 1,000 men, and send them over the hill to take a city that did nothing to him. War, as we know it, organized, industrial, the deliberate manufacture of dead men, is impossible without the forge, and Azazel lit the forge. And once one people has the sword, every neighboring people must have the sword or die, and so the knowledge races across the whole earth like fire in dry grass, kingdom arming against kingdom, until the making of weapons becomes the first and greatest industry of every civilization that has ever existed. It is still the greatest industry. We spend more, as a species, on the descendants of Azazel's swords than on almost anything else we do. He did not teach one murder. He taught the permanent possibility of the massacre. That is the Armory. Hold it. Do you see now why they blamed him above all the others? Samjaza gave them monstrous children who died in the flood. Azazel gave them war and vanity, and those two things have never died. Not once, not for a single day since. The whole earth has been corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel. To him ascribe all sin. When you read that line now, you understand it. He did not commit all the sin. He taught the tools that every sin uses. He is not the murderer. He is the one who forged the knife and painted the face of the one who lured the victim in. And the earth filled up with the fruit of it. And I want you to see the world he made, not as a doctrine, but as a place, because the Book of Enoch wants you to smell it. Picture a city in the first age of the world, before the flood, when the descent was in full flower. The forges never go cold, because there is always another war, and the smoke of them hangs over the streets, and the sound of the hammer on the anvil is the heartbeat of the town. In the market you can buy a blade that will open a man from shoulder to hip, and armor to keep the same from being done to you. And the men who cannot afford either are simply the ones who die first. And the women, the text tells you, are painted. The eyes are ringed in black antimony until they seem to swallow the light, the lids darkened, the arms heavy with beaten gold, the throat hung with costly stones, and the whole art of it is aimed at one thing, at being wanted, at pulling the eye and holding it. And there arose much godlessness, the text says, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and became corrupt in all their ways. A world armed to kill and dressed to seduce, a world where the two great engines of the human heart, fear and desire, had both been handed a technology, and neither one had a break. That is the civilization Azazel built. It is, if you are honest, not so far from a description of every civilization since. That is the point. That is why they could not forgive him. He did not build a wicked city that fell. He built the template, and we have been living in it ever since. And it did fill up. This is the part the Book of Enoch describes next, and it is the part that turns a story about angels teaching bad lessons into a catastrophe that heaven cannot ignore. Because the Watchers did not only teach, they bred. We covered this in full in earlier stories, so I will keep it to what you need here, but you must have it in front of you to understand what happens to Azazel. The sons of God took human wives, and the human wives bore them children, and the children were not human. They were giants, enormous, hungry, violent beings, part heaven and part earth, and they grew until the earth could not feed them, and when the food ran out, the text says, they turned on humanity itself. They began to devour. The giants consumed everything the people grew, and then the animals, and then, when nothing was left, they began to eat human flesh, and to drink the blood. And the whole earth, the Book of Enoch says, was filled with blood and unrighteousness. And I want you to feel the trap that closes here, because it is exquisite, and it is terrible. The giants are eating the human race, and what does the human race have to fight back with? It has the sword. It has Azazel's sword, the one gift that might have let it stand against a monster twice its height. So picture the men of the first world taking up the blades the fallen angel taught them to forge, and going out to meet the giants the fallen angels fathered, and the blood of that war soaking into the ground, and understand that every part of the catastrophe traces back to the descent. The monsters are the Watchers' children. The weapons are the Watchers' teaching. Even the defense is poisoned at the root. A world where angels walked openly, teaching the forbidden arts, and their giant children stalked the land-eating people. And the human race had been handed the sword to defend itself and the mirror to destroy itself. And everything was drowning in blood. That is the world Azazel built, not alone, but his fingerprints are on the weapon and on the vanity and on the whole poisoned age, and there is no corner of it he has not touched. And here is where the story lifts its eyes upward, because the blood does not stay on the ground. The Book of Enoch does something in this moment that I find almost unbearably moving. It says that the earth itself began to cry. The ground, soaked in the blood of the murdered, cried out, and the souls of the dead cried with it, a voice going up from the ruined world all the way to the gate of heaven. And the four great archangels, the ones who stand in the presence of God, Michael and Gabriel and Raphael, and one more, looked down from heaven and saw the blood being shed on the earth, and heard the crying, and they could not stay silent. They went before the Most High, and they laid it out, everything, the descent, the oath, the wives, the giants, the devouring, the blood, and above all the teaching, and listen to how they name it before the throne, because they do exactly what the text will do at the sentencing. They single him out. Thou seest what Azazel hath done, they say, who hath taught all unrighteousness on earth, and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven. He has revealed the secrets, they say. He has taken what was locked in heaven and handed it down to men, and the whole earth is drowning because of it. The archangels stand before God, pointing at one watcher out of 200, and they ask the question the whole ancient world was asking. What are you going to do about Azazel? And you have to understand how unusual this is, in the machinery of the story, that the very first thing heaven does, before the flood is even mentioned, before Noah is called, before the great cleansing water is prepared, is issue a command about a single fallen angel. God does not begin with the giants. God does not begin with the general drowning of the world. Heaven's first move in the Book of Enoch is to deal with Azazel personally, individually, by name, as if his crime were a separate category from all the others, as if the corruption he taught had to be answered before anything else could proceed. 4 archangels are given 4 commissions in that scene. One is sent to warn Noah of the coming flood. One is sent against Semjaza and the other watchers, to bind them under the hills until the judgment. One is sent to destroy the giants, to set the children of the watchers against one another so that they kill each other in a war of mutual slaughter. And the 4th commission, the one that is given first, the one that comes before the flood and before Noah, is about Azazel alone. And it is given to Raphael, the angel whose name means God heals, which is its own strange music, that the healer is the one sent to bind the one who wounded the world. And heaven answers. Heaven answers with a sentence so precise, so strange, and so physical that it will take you into a specific pit, in a specific desert, and lay specific rocks on a specific body. And it is that sentence, that exact sentence, that walks out of the Book of Enoch and into the temple in Jerusalem, and puts a goat in the wilderness on the holiest day of the year. But before I give it to you, before Raphael goes down with the command, hold on to what you have just watched. 200 came down. One of them, the second in command, opened the armory and the jewelry box at once, and taught the human race to kill and to covet, and to him the whole earth's corruption was ascribed. And now the archangels are standing before the throne with his name in their mouths, and God is about to speak. And what God says first, before the flood, before Noah, before anything, is a single command about a single angel: bind him. And where they bound him, and what they laid on top of him, and why, thousands of years later and hundreds of miles to the south, a priest in a temple would send a living goat walking out toward that exact place once every year, is where we are going next. Because the sentence heaven passed on Azazel did not stay in the Book of Enoch. It got up and it walked into the law of Moses, and it is hiding right now in a chapter you may have read a dozen times and never understood. Keep the red thread, keep the desert. We are about to watch an angel be buried alive. And the Lord said to Raphael, bind Azazel hand and foot and cast him into the darkness. That is how the sentence opens, and I want you to hear the physicality of it, because heaven could have said anything. It could have said, blot out his name. It could have said, unmake him, return him to nothing. It does not. It reaches for the language of rope and stone and pit, the language you would use to describe throwing a dangerous animal into a hole. Bind him hand and foot, not restrain him, not imprison him in some airy spiritual cell. Bind the hands, bind the feet, tie the limbs of the being who taught the human race to forge, so that the hands that open the armory can never open anything again. There is a terrible justice in binding the hands of the teacher of hands, and cast him into the darkness, the one who taught men to paint the eyes so they could be seen, so they could catch and hold the light, is thrown into a place where there is no light to catch. Every clause of this sentence answers a crime. It is not random cruelty, it is the exact inversion of everything he did. Picture the archangel carrying out the order, because the Book of Enoch means for you two. Raphael, the healer, one of the great 4 who stand in the presence of God, comes down out of heaven into the wilderness, and he takes the fallen watcher, the second in command of the whole rebellion, the one who armed the world, and he binds him. The hands that forged the first sword are lashed together, the feet are bound. The being who moved between heaven and earth as easily as you cross a room is reduced to a bound thing, helpless, carried like cargo to a hole in the ground. There is no battle. There is no contest. When heaven finally moves against Azazel, it is not a war. It is an arrest, swift and total, the overwhelming authority of the throne simply closing its hand. And then the text tells you where. And make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael, and cast him therein. Dudael, a place name, a specific location in the wilderness, and scholars have argued for a very long time about exactly where it was and what the name means. Some have connected it to a rough, jagged region east of Jerusalem, out in the barren country that falls away toward the Dead Sea, a landscape of cliffs and gorges and sun-blasted rock where nothing grows and no one lives. That country is real, and you can stand in it today, and it is one of the most desolate places on the face of the earth. A maze of chalk hills bleached white by the sun, folding down and down toward the lowest point on the surface of the planet, the salt sea where nothing swims. If you wanted to picture the mouth of the world, the place where the ordered land runs out and the waste begins, you could not do better than that wilderness. And some of the later Jewish tradition, as we will see, placed the destination of the scapegoat in exactly that kind of country, a jagged cliff in the desert east of the city. Others read the name Dudael itself as carrying a meaning close to the cauldron of God, or God's cliff, the sheer drop, the place of the fall. And I want you to hold that word, Dudael, and that image, the opening made in the desert, the pit torn into the floor of the wilderness, because it is going to matter enormously when we reach the temple. For now, simply see it, a hole in the desert, the most desolate place the ancient imagination could picture, the anti-Eden, the land without water or life, and in the floor of it, an opening, a shaft going down into the dark. That is where they take him. And then the sentence gets worse, and more specific and stranger, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks. Do you see what they are doing to him? They are not merely dropping him into a pit and walking away. They are piling stones on top of him, rough and jagged, sharp broken rock heaped over the bound body, pinning him, crushing him down into the floor of the world, so that even if the ropes should ever fail, there is a mountain of stone above him he could never move. They are burying him. This is a burial of a living, deathless being in the desert, under a cairn of jagged rock. And then, the cruelest clause of all, and cover his face that he may not see light. Cover his face. Of everything in the sentence, this is the one that has always undone me. It is not enough to bind him and bury him and pile the stones on him. They cover his face, specifically, deliberately, so that he cannot see light, so that in the eternity of his imprisonment there will not be one stray beam, not one crack of dawn, not one memory of brightness. The angel who was, in his origin, a being of light, a son of the morning, is to lie in the desert with his face covered forever, so that light never touches him again. And let him abide there forever, the text says, forever. Cover his face that he may not see light, and let him abide there forever. And I keep returning to the light, because the whole of the ancient imagination about the fallen ones runs on it. The angels are creatures of light. That is what they are made of. That is the substance of them, the radiance of the presence of God reflected and carried. To fall, for such a being, is to lose the light, to be cut off from the source of it, to dim. And the deepest cruelty heaven can devise for the one who fell furthest is not fire, not yet. The fire is saved for the end. The deepest cruelty for now is simply darkness. Complete it. Cover the face. Take the being who was made of light, who taught the daughters of men to paint their eyes so they could catch the light and throw it back, and lay him in a pit where there is no light at all. And then, in case the pit itself is not enough, cover his face, so that the darkness is total and personal and pressed against the eyes. It is the photographic negative of everything he was. He came down bright. He lies in the dark. He taught the eyes to be seen. His eyes are covered. He armed the hand. His hands are bound. Every single element of the punishment is the crime turned inside out, which is how you know the sentence was not written by rage, but by a terrible patient justice that fit the penalty to the deed clause by clause. Feel how long that is. Forever. The watchers were spirits. They do not die of old age. They do not starve. They do not fade. Azazel is not being executed. Execution would be mercy compared to this. Azazel is being stored. He is being set aside, alive, aware, bound, buried, blinded, in a pit in the desert, to lie there conscious through every century that rolls over the world above him, while empires rise and fall on the surface, while Abraham walks out of Ur, and Moses climbs Sinai, and Jerusalem is built and burned, and built again. Azazel lies under the jagged rocks in the dark, unable to move, unable to see, waiting. That is the sentence. And when you understand it, you will never again read the 16th chapter of Leviticus the same way, because there is a goat that walks, once a year, out toward that pit. And notice, too, that Azazel is punished apart from the rest, and that separateness is its own kind of verdict. When heaven deals with Semjaza and the other watchers, the ones who took the wives, they are bound together as a group, and the text says they are to be shut up under the hills of the earth, imprisoned in the depths, to wait there through 70 generations until the day of their judgment. Under the hills, collectively, a crowd of the fallen, locked away together in the deep places of the world. But not Azazel. Azazel does not go under the hills with the others. Azazel gets his own address, alone, in the desert, in the opening at Dudael, singled out, isolated, the one prisoner given a separate cell in a separate country. And that solitary confinement is a measure of how the tradition ranked his guilt. The others sinned in a crowd and are jailed in a crowd. Azazel, the teacher, the one to whom all sin is ascribed, is set apart even in punishment, buried by himself in the wilderness where no one else is bound, so that when the ritual of the Day of Atonement needs a destination for the nation's sin, there is one lone figure out there in the waste, unmistakable, unaccompanied, a single dark landmark in the empty country. Heaven did not lose him in a crowd of the fallen. It gave him his own desert, and a nation would one day know exactly which way to send the goat. And notice what the sentence does not say, because the silence is loud. It does not say heaven forgives him. It does not offer him anywhere a road back. The other watchers, in some readings of the tradition, are bound to await a judgment whose outcome is at least pronounced. Azazel is simply buried and told to wait for the fire. And it does not say either that he is powerless. This is the part that unsettles me most. A being buried in the desert is still in the desert. The wilderness, in the Hebrew imagination, was already the haunt of unclean spirits, the dry and desolate country where the demons of the waste were thought to prowl, the anti-world outside the ordered camp where God's people lived. And now the fiercest of the fallen has been planted in the middle of that wasteland like a poisoned seed. Bound, yes. Buried, yes. But there, present, a permanent dark address out in the empty land. The desert had a resident, and everyone who told these stories knew where he lived, which is precisely why, when a priest needed to send something away from the holy place, away from the presence of God, out into the realm of corruption where it belonged, there was already a direction to send it, and already a name at the end of the road. But the sentence has one more clause, and it is the one I asked you to hold from the very beginning, the plant that has to come back at the end. So let me set it in front of you now and then leave it, the way the text does. And on the day of the great judgment he shall be cast into the fire. So the imprisonment is not the end of him. It is the waiting room, the desert pit, the rocks, the covered face, the darkness. All of it is temporary in the strange arithmetic of eternity, a holding cell until the last day, when Azazel will be taken up out of the pit and thrown, finally, into the fire. 2 stages, first the desert, then the fire, first the burial, for the whole long age of the world. Then, at the very end, the burning. Hold both, the desert now, the fire later. Because when we return to the temple at the finish, and we watch what the priests actually did with the goat, and with a certain strip of scarlet wool, you are going to see that the ritual remembers both stages. It remembers the desert, and in its own strange way, it remembers the fire. Keep the 2 stages. Keep the red thread. And there is one more clause in Raphael's commission, and it changes the color of the whole thing, because it tells you what the binding was for. After the command to bind Azazel and bury him and cover his face, the Lord says, "And heal the earth which the angels have corrupted." Heal the earth, that is the purpose. The binding of Azazel is not vengeance, in the logic of the text. It is medicine. The angel who was named God heals is sent to bind the angel who wounded the world, precisely so that the world can begin to heal. And then the sentence widens, and it lays the whole ruin at Azazel's feet, one final time, in the language of the judgment itself. The whole earth has been corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel, it says. To him ascribe all sin. There is that line again, but now it is not the archangels reporting it. It is the verdict, the formal charge read at the sentencing. The reason the pit is being dug. To him ascribe all sin. And the commission to heal the earth is set right beside it, as if to say, the wound has a name, and the name is Azazel, and until the source of the infection is bound in the desert, the healing cannot begin. Sit with that logic, because it is exactly the logic we're going to find running underneath the temple ritual. To make the world clean, you first have to send the corruption back to its source, out of the camp, into the wilderness, to Azazel. Heaven does it here with an archangel and a pit. Leviticus is going to do it every single year with a priest and a goat. Now, I have to stop and be honest with you about the book I have been reading from, because the honesty is the whole reason to trust any of this. The Book of Enoch is not in most Bibles. It was not included in the collection that Jewish and most Christian communities settled on as scripture. For most of the last 2,000 years, in the West, it was lost entirely, known only by rumor and by quotation, until copies were found preserved in the ancient Church of Ethiopia, which had kept it as scripture all along. And a traveler brought it back to Europe, and it was translated, and the modern world could read again the book that Genesis seems to be pointing at. And that phrase, pointing at, is the key, because here is what is genuinely remarkable and what I can show you in your own Bible right now. The Book of Enoch is not just some late fantasy invented centuries after the Scripture. The Scripture quotes it. In the New Testament, in the short letter of Jude, Near the very end of the Bible, the writer reaches for a prophecy to make his point, and the prophecy he quotes is from the Book of Enoch, and he names the author. Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, he writes, and then he quotes words that are found in the Book of Enoch and nowhere in the accepted Old Testament. A writer of the New Testament quotes Enoch as a prophet. The book was known, it was read, it was taken seriously by the very people who wrote the scriptures. It simply did not make the final cut of the canon, and there is a long and genuine scholarly debate about why, but its influence soaked into everything around it. And this is the point I need you to hold. When we get to Leviticus, when we find the name Azazel sitting in the law of Moses, we are not going to be smuggling in a foreign idea. We are going to be finding, in the accepted scripture, the footprint of exactly the story the Book of Enoch tells. The two books are in conversation. They always were. And the conversation is old, older than the surviving copies, which is the part that gives it weight. The traditions about the Watchers and about Azazel were alive in Jewish thought for centuries before and around the time of Jesus. They show up woven through the Book of Jubilees, another ancient text we have looked at on this channel, which retells the story of the descent and the binding. Fragments of the Book of Enoch itself were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the caves above the wilderness by the Dead Sea, copies far older than the Ethiopian manuscripts that preserved the whole book, proof that this was not a late medieval invention, but a genuinely ancient stream of belief that ran right alongside the scriptures. The people of the wilderness communities copied Enoch and treasured it. When the writers of the New Testament reached for the story of the fallen angels bound in chains of darkness reserved for judgment, they were reaching into this same living tradition. So when I tell you that the name Azazel in Leviticus and the Azazel bound in the desert in Enoch are the same figure, I am not building a bridge out of nothing across a 1,000-year gap. The two shores were always close together, and there were people standing on both of them at once, reading both books, and to them the connection was not a revelation, it was obvious. It is only obvious to us, now, when we put the books back side by side, which is exactly what this channel exists to do. Because look at what Genesis itself actually says, in the 6th chapter, right before the flood, and notice how little it explains and how much it assumes. The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, the text says, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And a few verses later, there were giants in the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. That is almost all Genesis gives you, a handful of verses. Sons of God, daughters of men, giants, and then the flood. Genesis states it and moves on, as if the reader already knows the fuller story, as if it is gesturing at something the first audience understood, and we have forgotten. And I owe you honesty here too, because that phrase, the sons of God, has itself been read 3 different ways down the centuries, and I have laid this out more fully in earlier films, so I will keep it brief. Some have said the sons of God were simply the godly line of Seth, ordinary men who intermarried with the wicked line of Cain, a purely human affair with no angels in it at all. Some have said they were human kings and princes, petty tyrants who took whatever women they wanted, the sons of God meaning something like sons of the mighty. And the oldest reading, the one held by the writers of the Book of Enoch, and by the earliest Jewish and Christian interpreters almost without exception, is the plain and terrible one, that the sons of God were divine beings, angels, the Watchers, who left their proper place and came down. Each reading has its defenders, and I will not pretend the question is closed. But notice that only one of the 3 actually explains the rest of the passage. The giants, the men of renown, the sheer scale of the catastrophe that follows, the need for a flood to answer it. Ordinary intermarriage does not produce giants. Only the reading that Genesis shares with the Book of Enoch does, and that is the reading in which Azazel lives. Genesis states it and moves on. And the fuller story, the who and the how and the names, the oath on the mountain, the teaching of the forbidden arts, the sentence in the desert, all of it is in the Book of Enoch. Genesis is the tip, Enoch is the iceberg, and the name that surfaces in both, the name that ties the drowned world of Enoch to the temple ritual of Leviticus, is the one we are chasing, Azazel. So let us look hard at the name itself, because the name is a battlefield, and I'm not going to pretend the scholars agree, because they do not, and the disagreement is part of the truth. Azazel. In Hebrew, it is written with letters that could be read more than one way, and for 2,000 years, readers have pulled it in different directions. One old reading breaks it into two pieces, Ez, meaning goat, and Azazel, meaning to go away or to depart, so that Azazel would mean something like the goat that departs, or the goat that is sent away. And you can feel why that reading is attractive, because in Leviticus the word is attached to exactly that, a goat that is sent away into the wilderness. This is where the Old English word scapegoat comes from, the escape goat, the goat that goes out. Some of the earliest translators took the word this way, as a description of what happens to the animal rather than a name, but there is a problem with that reading, and the problem is the structure of the sentence in Leviticus itself, which we will look at closely, because the text sets the name Azazel in exact parallel with the name of the Lord, one goat for the Lord, and one goat for Azazel, and you do not set a description in parallel with a person. Which brings the second reading, the one that has grown stronger and stronger among scholars over the last century. The reading that says Azazel is not a description at all. It is a name, the name of a being, a powerful being who lives in the wilderness, a demon of the desert to whom the goat is sent. And the moment you say that, the Book of Enoch lights up, because the Book of Enoch has a being named Azazel, bound in the desert, in a pit under the jagged rocks. The name matches, the location matches, the desert matches, and a great many serious scholars now argue that the Azazel of Leviticus and the Azazel of Enoch are the same figure, that the law of Moses is referring, without explanation, to a wilderness power the original audience knew by name, the same fallen angel whose fuller story Enoch preserves. There is even a reading of the name that breaks it as Azazel, meaning strong or fierce, and El, the common word for God or for a divine being, giving something like the fierce one of God, or the strong power, a fitting name for a mighty fallen spirit. And there is a fourth reading, favored by some, that treats the word as a place, a rough and difficult terrain, a precipice, so that to send the goat to Azazel would be to send it to the jagged cliff, the sheer drop in the wilderness. Honesty requires me to tell you that we cannot be certain which of these is correct. The word is ancient, and the vowels are uncertain, and reasonable scholars still divide. And anyone who tells you the question is settled is selling you something. But now stand back and look at all four readings at once, and notice something extraordinary. The goat that departs, the fierce power of God, the demon of the wilderness, the jagged cliff in the desert. Every single one of those readings, even the ones that disagree with each other, points at the same picture, a wilderness. A rough and jagged place, a sending away, a powerful being. It is as if the word itself cannot be pronounced without conjuring a fallen spirit bound in a rocky desert, which is to say, without conjuring the exact figure the Book of Enoch buried under the rough and jagged rocks in the opening in the desert, which is in Dudael. The etymologies fight, and yet they all describe the same crime scene. The ground under this is soft, and I will keep telling you when it is soft. But the shape that keeps rising up out of the soft ground, no matter which way you read the letters, is a person in the wilderness among the jagged rocks with a name. And now I can take you into the chapter itself, into the holiest ritual of the ancient Hebrew year, and show you the names sitting in it, and show you what they did. Open the third book of the law, the book of Leviticus, to the 16th chapter. This is the chapter that establishes the Day of Atonement, the day the Hebrews call Yom Kippur, the single most solemn day in the entire religious calendar, the day when the high priest, and only the high priest, and only on this one day of the year, was permitted to pass through the veil into the innermost room of the sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, the place where the presence of God was said to dwell above the ark, a room so holy that to enter it wrongly, or on the wrong day, was to die. And the chapter opens, pointedly, by reminding the reader of exactly that danger. It begins by recalling the two sons of Aaron who had died when they came near before the Lord with strange fire, struck down for approaching the holiness carelessly. And the Lord says to Moses, "Speak to Aaron your brother, that he come not at all times into the holy place within the veil, that he die not." That is the frame around the whole day. This is a chapter about how a mortal man can come into the presence of a holy God and not be destroyed. The stakes are life and death, literally, for the priest who performs it, and the whole elaborate ceremony, the bathing, the linen, the incense, the blood, exists to make it survivable for a sinful human being to stand for a moment in the place where heaven touches earth. It is into that frame, at that pitch of danger and holiness, that the two goats are led. This is not a minor rite tucked into the calendar. It is the most dangerous and most sacred thing the religion ever did, and a demon's name is written into the middle of it. On this day, once a year, The whole nation fasted and afflicted itself and confessed, and the high priest performed the great ceremony that cleansed the people and the sanctuary itself of a year's accumulated sin. Let me put you inside the day, because the ritual is not an abstraction. It is a piece of theater performed in blood and smoke in front of a whole nation, and the details are the meaning. It is autumn, the 10th day of the 7th month by the old reckoning. The people have fasted since the evening before, no food, no water, the whole nation hollowed out and afraid. The high priest has bathed and put aside his ordinary golden vestments and dressed instead in plain white linen, the clothing of humility, because on this day he stands not as a prince but as a supplicant for a guilty people. A bull is brought for his own sins and the sins of his house, because the man who carries the nation's guilt must first be clean himself. Incense is prepared, to be carried in a censer into the innermost room so that a cloud of smoke will cover the mercy seat, because no man may look directly on the place of the presence and live. And blood, the blood of the bull and then the blood of one of the goats will be carried through the veil and sprinkled in the holiest room to cleanse the sanctuary itself of the defilement that a year of human sin has smeared across it. That is the ceremony. Fasting, linen, incense, blood, the one man passing through the veil into the presence of God on behalf of everyone. And at the center of that ceremony, the very heart of the holiest day, stand 2 goats. And here is the first strange thing about them, before we even reach the name. They are identical. The law is specific that the 2 goats are to be alike, a matched pair, and they are brought and set side by side at the door of the tent, and no one, looking at them, can tell which is which. There is nothing about the second goat that marks it as the sinner, nothing wicked in its face, nothing that separates it from the goat that will be given to God. They are the same. And then their 2 utterly different destinies are decided not by merit, not by inspection, but by lot, by pure chance, by the drawing of 2 markers out of a container. Think about what that does. It says that the difference between the goat that goes to God and the goat that goes to Azazel is not in the goats at all. It is in the lot. The fate is assigned from outside. 2 identical creatures, and a hand reaches into the box, and one is now holy and one is now the carrier of a nation's filth, bound for the wilderness. There is a whole sermon hiding in that, but hold it lightly, and simply keep the picture. 2 the same, chosen by lot, one for the Lord, one for the other. And Aaron shall cast lots upon the 2 goats, the text says, one lot for the Lord, and the other lot for the scapegoat, except that word scapegoat is the translator's guess. What the Hebrew actually says, in the place where the Old English writes scapegoat, is one lot for the Lord, and the other lot for Azazel. There it is, in the law of Moses, in the accepted scripture that sits in every Bible on earth. On the holiest day of the year, the high priest takes 2 goats, identical, and he casts lots over them. And by the fall of the lot, 1 goat is assigned to the Lord, and the other goat is assigned to Azazel. Read it again and feel the vertigo of it. The name of the desert-bound fallen angel from the Book of Enoch is standing in the Book of Leviticus, in perfect parallel with the name of God, over 2 goats on the Day of Atonement, one for the Lord, one for Azazel. And the priest reaches into the box, and he draws the lots, and he lays them on the heads of the 2 animals. And now 1 goat belongs to God, and 1 goat belongs to the fierce one in the wilderness. And the whole nation is watching to see what he will do with them. And before we follow the goat, let me be fair to the other side, because there are careful readers, ancient and modern, who resist all of this, and you deserve to hear them. They say the word need not name a demon at all. They point to the reading of Azazel as the goat that departs, or as a place, the jagged cliff, and they argue that to send the goat to Azazel simply means to send it away, to remove it utterly, to the far rough country, and nothing more. Some ancient translators rendered the phrase as for the sending away, or for the complete removal, precisely to avoid the suggestion that Israel was giving a goat to a spirit. And they have a real point, and I will not pretend otherwise, because the last thing the religion of one God would seem to want is a rival name standing beside the divine name over a sacrifice. That discomfort is exactly why some readers have always pushed the demon reading away. But here is what that objection cannot easily explain, and why the demon reading keeps coming back no matter how often it is buried. The grammar sets Azazel opposite the Lord, name against name, 1 lot for the one and 1 lot for the other, and that parallel is very hard to read as a mere direction. And the destination, the wilderness, the jagged rocks, matches, with uncanny precision, the pit where an ancient and widely known tradition had already buried a being called Azazel. The objectors are right that we cannot prove it. The objectors have never been able to explain the coincidence away. And so the whole nation is watching the priest, and so are we, to see what he will do with them. And what he does with them is the thing that no one ever explains to you, the thing that turns a ritual into a reenactment, the thing that reaches all the way back to a pit in the desert with jagged rocks piled on a covered face. Because the goat for the Lord is about to die, but the goat for Azazel is going to walk. It is going to be loaded with something and let out of the camp and taken into the wilderness toward a certain place and let go. And when you see where it goes and what tradition says was done to it when it got there, the red thread is going to pull tight, and you are going to understand that the holiest day in the Hebrew calendar has, standing at the far end of it, in the desert, under the rocks, an angel with his face covered. Watch what the priest lays on the head of the second goat. He lays his hands on it, both of them. The text is careful about this because it is the hinge of the whole ceremony. Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat, it says, and confess over him all the iniquities of the children of Israel, and all their transgressions in all their sins, putting them upon the head of the goat. Watch what is happening. The high priest, the one man permitted to stand in the presence of God, presses both his hands down onto the head of the living animal, and he speaks. He confesses. Out loud, over the goat, he names the sins of the entire nation, all the iniquities, all the transgressions, all the sins, a whole year of a whole people's failure spoken into the body of one animal. And the gesture of the two hands pressing down is a gesture of transfer. In the mind of everyone watching, the guilt is leaving the people and flowing down through the priest's arms and into the goat, until the goat is no longer just a goat. It is a container. It is walking, breathing, living sin. Everything wrong that Israel did in a year is now standing on four legs at the door of the sanctuary, and it has somewhere to go. And I want you to notice how physical, how almost crude that idea is, because it tells you something about how the ancient mind understood sin. To us, sin is an abstraction, a moral quality, a stain on the character that you cannot see your way. To the world of Leviticus, sin was closer to a substance, something that accumulated, that clung to a place, that had to be physically removed the way you would carry filth out of a house. All year long, in this way of thinking, the sins of the people had been building up, defiling the land and the sanctuary itself, a kind of invisible pollution gathering in the holy place like soot on a lamp. And once a year the whole system had to be purged, scrubbed, carried out. The blood of the one goat scrubbed the sanctuary clean, and the other goat carried the removed filth away, out of the settled world entirely, so that it could not drift back. You do not leave the garbage at the edge of the camp where the wind can return it. You carry it far out, into the land where no one lives, and you leave it there, and the further the better. That is the logic. And the furthest place, the most cut off, the most utterly outside, was the deep wilderness, the haunt of the desert spirit, the address of Azazel. And it shall bear upon him all their iniquities unto a land not inhabited, the text says. A land not inhabited, a land cut off. The goat is going to carry the sins of the nation into a place where no one lives, out of the ordered world of the camp and into the empty waste, and it is going to be let go there, released, driven off into the wilderness with the whole weight of the year on its back. And he shall let go the goat in the wilderness. That is the command, in the plain words of Leviticus. Say those two phrases over to yourself, because the whole mystery is folded inside them. A land not inhabited, the wilderness. In a religion built entirely around one central place, the sanctuary, the mountain, the city where God had put his name, the one location that mattered, the ritual deliberately drives its most loaded object in the exact opposite direction, out, away, to the one place defined by the absence of God's people and God's order, the uninhabited land, the wilderness, the anti-place. Everything holy moves toward the center. This one thing, the sin, moves toward the edge and then past it, into the country that belongs to no one, or rather, into the country that belongs to the one who is exiled there. The geography is the theology, toward God, blood and worship and drawing near, away from God, out to the waste, the sin and the goat, and the fierce one waiting among the rocks. And he shall let go the goat in the wilderness. Load the goat with the nation's sin, and let it go in the wilderness. And now put that command next to the sentence in the Book of Enoch, and let the two of them touch, because this is the moment the whole story has been building toward. Enoch says heaven took the being who taught mankind all its sin and bound him in an opening in the desert, in the wilderness, to bear the corruption of the earth. Leviticus says the priest takes the sin of the whole nation, lays it on a goat, and drives the goat into the wilderness, toward Azazel. The sin goes out to the one to whom sin was ascribed. The corruption is sent back to the source of the corruption. Do you see it now? Do you see what the holiest day is doing? It is sending the sin of Israel home to Azazel, home to the pit in the desert where the author of that sin lies bound under the jagged rocks with his face covered. The ritual is an address, and the address is Dudael. Now, I have to be careful here, and honest, because the Bible itself does not narrate a goat being thrown off a cliff, and it does not describe Azazel receiving it, and I will not put words in the text that are not there. What the Bible says is what I just gave you. 2 goats, 2 lots, one for the Lord and one for Azazel. The sins confessed onto the live goat, the goat led into the wilderness and released in a land not inhabited. That is Scripture. But the story does not stop at Scripture, because the people who kept this ritual went on keeping it for centuries, and they wrote down, in enormous detail, exactly how they did it. In those writings, the later Jewish tradition preserved in the Mishnah and the Talmud, in a tractate that deals with the Day of Atonement, tell us what the ceremony actually looked like in the last centuries of the Temple in Jerusalem. And what they describe is extraordinary, and I give it to you clearly labeled as later tradition, not as the words of Moses, because the honesty is the point, and because the later tradition did not invent the strangeness. It inherited it and made it visible. Here is what the tradition describes. On the Day of Atonement, when the lots had been cast and the sins confessed, the goat for Azazel was handed to a specially appointed man, a man chosen and set apart for this single task, and he led it out of Jerusalem, eastward, out of the city gate and down into the wilderness that falls toward the Dead Sea, that white and jagged country we stood in earlier. And the tradition preserves the anxiety of the crowd with a detail that tells you everything about how seriously they took it. The way was long, a distance of some miles out into the waste, and the people were so desperate that the sin truly be carried all the way away and not falter partway and drift back, that they built booths, stations, at intervals along the road, and at each booth men waited, and as the leader passed each one, a man would rise and walk with him to the next, offering him food and water, though the escorts fasted like everyone else, accompanying the goat and its terrible cargo from station to station, handing it forward, deeper and deeper into the emptiness, as if the sin were a fugitive that must never be left alone on the road lest it turn around and come home. The tradition even remembers that the more honored citizens of Jerusalem would walk the leader out to the first booth, unwilling to simply watch the thing go, needing to escort their own guilt at least the first stretch of its exile, a rough, jagged precipice in the desert. And the man who led the goat did not simply release it there to wander, as a plain reading of Leviticus might suggest. He drove it backward off the cliff. He pushed the sin-laden goat off the edge of the precipice into the ravine below, and the tradition says that before the animal had fallen even halfway down the rocky slope, it was torn to pieces. The sins of Israel, loaded onto a living body, were hurled off a jagged cliff in the wilderness and destroyed among the rocks. Sit with that image next to the sentence in the Book of Enoch and feel the hair rise. Enoch says they made an opening in the desert and cast Azazel therein, and placed upon him rough and jagged rocks. The tradition says they took the goat that bore the name of Azazel and cast it off a jagged cliff in the desert among the rocks. The verb is the same. The casting down. The desert is the same. The jagged rocks are the same. It is as if the ritual is not merely sending sin toward the place where Azazel is bound. It is reenacting, once every year, with a goat standing in for the demon, the very casting down that heaven performed at the beginning. The goat for Azazel dies the death of Azazel, thrown among the jagged rocks in the desert waste. Whether the priests of the later temple consciously understood it that way, we cannot fully know, and I will not claim they did. But the shape of the thing is unmistakable, the oldest sentence in the forbidden book and the last living form of the holiest ritual rhyme, down to the rocks. And now, at last, the red thread. I asked you at the very beginning to hold on to the color red, a single scarlet thread, and here is where it pays what it owes. The same later tradition tells us that a strip of crimson wool was tied to the goat that was sent to Azazel, or according to some accounts split, half tied to the goat and half tied to the door of the sanctuary, or to a rock at the cliff. And the crimson had a meaning, and the meaning came from the words of the prophet Isaiah, who had written, "Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Scarlet to white. The crimson wool was the color of the nation's sin, tied to the body that carried the sin away, and its color was chosen to be argued with, chosen to be defeated. Because red, in the old imagination, was the color of blood and of guilt, the color of the sins that stain the hands, and Isaiah's promise was the boldest reversal the prophets ever dared, that the God of Israel could take a scarlet stain, the deepest and most set of all dyes, the one that does not wash out, and make it white as snow. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. And so the priests tied a strip of exactly that scarlet, that crimson, that unwashable red, to the animal that carried the year's guilt out to the desert, and the whole nation held its breath over the color of a piece of wool. And the tradition makes a claim about that wool that is one of the strangest things in the whole record. It says that in the years when the atonement was accepted, when the sin was truly carried away and the people truly forgiven, the crimson thread would turn white. The scarlet would blanch to the color of snow in front of the watching priests, exactly as Isaiah had promised, a visible sign from heaven that the sins had been received and removed, and the people were clean. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. And the thread, the tradition says, went white. I am telling you this as tradition, not as proven history, and you should hold it as tradition, because we cannot verify a miracle recorded in an ancient religious text, and I would never ask you to. But I have to give you the last piece of it, because it is haunting, and because the tradition itself records it with a kind of grief. The same rabbinic sources say that for about the last 40 years before the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, the crimson thread stopped turning white. Year after year, at the end of that era, the priests tied the scarlet wool and watched, and it stayed scarlet. The sign was withheld. Whatever you make of that, and there is a great deal one could make of it, and different traditions make very different things, the people who preserved this memory believed that in its final decades, the great ritual had, in some way they could see with their own eyes, stopped working. The thread stayed red, and then the temple was gone, burned by the armies of Rome, and the Day of Atonement has never again been kept with 2 goats and a cliff and a strip of wool, because there has been no temple and no high priest to keep it. The goat has not walked to Azazel in nearly 2,000 years, but the name is still there, in the 16th chapter of Leviticus, waiting in the text for anyone who reads closely enough to ask who he was. And the name did not disappear from imagination when the temple fell. Azazel had a long afterlife, and I want to walk you through it quickly, because it shows you how large this one fallen watcher loomed in the mind of the ancient and medieval world. In another old Jewish work, the Apocalypse of Abraham, written around the era of the temple's destruction, Azazel appears again, and now he has grown into something like the great adversary himself, an unclean bird that swoops down on Abraham's sacrifice, a spirit of ungodliness, the ruler of the wicked, the one whose portion is the earth and the burning below. In that book, Azazel is told that because he has loved what is corrupt, the corruption of the world is now his inheritance, his portion, and the righteous who were destined for his place will now take the place he lost in heaven. He has become the pattern of the fallen, the being who traded heaven for the ruin of the earth and got exactly what he chose. And there is a line in that book that I cannot get out of my head, where Azazel is called the one whose heritage is those who are with the stars and clouds, and who tempts the sons of men, and it names him, this single watcher, as a kind of prince of the whole downward pull, the gravity of corruption itself given a face and a name. What began in the oldest layer of Enoch as one angel among 200, the one who taught metalwork and cosmetics, has grown by the time of this book into something close to the great tempter, the lord of the wilderness of this world, the being whose very inheritance is everyone who chooses the corrupt thing. That is a long way to travel for a name. It is the distance between a teacher of swords and the shadow that falls across the whole human story. And the ancient world traveled it because it could not stop feeling that the thing Azazel started was still going, that the corruption he introduced had never been contained, that he was, in some sense, still teaching. And in later Jewish and then Islamic tradition, the name and the figure blur into the larger story of the chief of the fallen, and you will find Azazel identified by some with the very rebel angel who refused to bow, the one Islam calls Iblis, though I flag that for you carefully as a later and separate development, a merging of traditions, not something the Book of Enoch or Leviticus says. And down through the centuries of medieval demonology, the name kept its dark prestige. Azazel remembered as one of the chief of the fallen, the standard-bearer of the armies of hell in some of the old lists, the one who taught men war and women vanity. Still wearing, 1,000 years later, the two crimes the Book of Enoch first pinned on him, the armory and the mirror. He never put them down. But strip all the later legend away, and go back to the two texts we can actually hold, the Book of Enoch and the Book of Leviticus, and stand between them, because the thing they say together is the real payoff, and it is bigger and stranger than any demonology. Here it is. On the holiest day of the year, the people of God performed a ritual with 2 goats. 1 goat was for the Lord. Its blood was carried into the presence of God, into the holiest room in the world, and sprinkled on the mercy seat. And by that blood, the sanctuary and the people were made clean before God. That is one motion, upward, toward heaven, in blood. But cleansing is not only about bringing something to God, it is also about taking something away. And so there was a second goat, and a second motion, and it went the other direction. The second goat did not go up toward heaven. It went out, into the wilderness, away from the presence, carrying the sin that had been removed, and it went to Azazel. 2 goats, 2 directions, 2 halves of a single act of atonement. The blood goes up to God to make clean. The sin goes out to Azazel to be carried away, and the second half means something almost unbearable when you understand who Azazel is. It means that the removal of Israel's sin was pictured as sending that sin back to the one who first taught the human race to sin. The corruption returns to its author. The uncleanness is loaded onto a body and driven out to the fierce one in the desert, back to the pit, back to the source. And the people, having sent their sin home to the one it came from, are clean. And if you think that a demon living in the wilderness receiving the year's sin out among the rocks is too strange an idea to be sitting in the law of Moses, then let me show you that the law says it more than once, and that the wilderness of the Hebrew imagination was crowded with exactly this kind of thing. Turn the page. The very next chapter, the 17th of Leviticus, right after the 2 goats, lays down a hard command, and listen to what it is guarding against. And they shall no more offer their sacrifices unto devils, the text says, after whom they have gone a-whoring. Devils, that is the Old English word, but the Hebrew underneath it is a specific and startling word. It is se'irim, and it means the hairy ones, the goat things, the goat demons. The law is forbidding Israel from sacrificing to the goat demons of the wilderness, which means the people were doing it, or had done it, or were tempted to do it, because you do not forbid a thing that no one wants. The Hebrews came out of Egypt and out of the wider ancient world carrying a folk belief that the desert was full of hairy goat-shaped spirits that had to be fed and warded off, and the law of Moses is fighting that belief on the same page where it sends a goat to Azazel. Do you feel how close those two things sit? On one page, a goat is sent to a named power in the wilderness. On the next, the people are forbidden to sacrifice to the goat demons of that same wilderness. Whatever the exact relationship, and scholars argue about it, the desert of the Bible was understood to be inhabited, and what inhabited it wore the shape of a goat. And once you see that, the choice of animal in the ritual stops looking like an accident. Of all the creatures the law could have sent into the wilderness, of all the beasts a shepherding people kept, it sends a goat. Not a lamb, the animal of the Passover and of gentleness, a goat. And the wilderness it walks into is a place the same law says is full of goat demons. The vehicle matches the destination. A goat-shaped sin, carried by a goat, into the country of the goat spirits, to the fierce one whose very name, on one of its readings, contains the word for goat. Layer on layer, the ritual keeps rhyming with itself. I am not telling you the Hebrews consciously worked all of that out. I am telling you that the pieces fit together with a tightness that is hard to call coincidence, and that the ancient reader, who lived surrounded by the belief in the hairy ones of the waste, would have felt the fit in his bones in a way we have to reconstruct with effort. To him, sending a goat out to the power in the desert was not a riddle. It was the most natural direction in the world to send the sin, because that was where the sin belonged, out there with the goat things, in the country of Azazel. And this was not some private Hebrew oddity. The wider ancient world was thick with the same instinct. The Egyptians, the Hebrews, had just come out of feared and worshipped the powers of the Red Desert, the barren land beyond the Green Valley, the realm of the god of chaos and storm and the wasteland. And they too knew the idea of driving evil out into the desert to be rid of it. Across the whole ancient Near East, you find rituals of sending, of loading a plague or a curse or a year's evil onto an animal or an object and driving it out of the town into the wild so that it would carry the harm away with it. The law of Moses takes that deep and universal human instinct, the sense that evil can be gathered and expelled into the wilderness, and it does something no one else did with it. It gives the wilderness a single name, not a vague crowd of desert spirits. One, Azazel, the fallen teacher, bound in the rocks, waiting. Israel took the oldest ritual instinct of the ancient world and pointed it at the one figure its own sacred book said was the source of all the corruption in the first place. And the prophets knew it too. Open the book of the prophet Isaiah to his great poems about the ruin of the wicked cities, and watch what he puts in the rubble once the people are gone. He describes a fallen city given over to desolation, and he says the wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and the satyr shall cry to his fellow, and the night creature shall rest there and find herself a place of rest. The satyr. There is that goat demon again, the seer, crying to its fellow across the ruins of a dead city, and beside it a night creature, a word some translations leave as the screech owl and others render as a name. Lilith, the night hag of the old desert lore. Isaiah is not writing a treatise on demons. He is painting a picture of utter abandonment, and the way he signals that a place has been given wholly over to the powers of chaos is to fill it with the goat demons and the night creatures of the waste. The wilderness, in the mind of ancient Israel, was where the ordered world of God ran out and the goat-shaped things began. And it is into precisely that world, past the last booth, out among the crying satyrs and the resting night creatures, that the high priest sent a goat once a year, loaded with the sins of the nation, to a power whose name was Azazel. The scapegoat did not walk into an empty desert. It walked into a desert the whole ancient world believed was full of eyes. And the strangest confirmation of all was still lying in the ground, unread, while every word of this was being copied and argued over, waiting to be dug out of the earth in our own lifetime. Because when the ancient scrolls were found in the caves above the Dead Sea, in that same white and jagged wilderness where the tradition sent the goat, the community that had hidden them turned out to have been steeped in exactly this story. They copied the Book of Enoch. They copied the Book of Jubilees. They wrote their own texts about the fallen angels and the coming judgment. And in at least one fragmentary scroll, a text that lists the ages of creation and the working out of God's plan, the name Azazel appears, tied to the angels who went astray and to the corruption of the earth, the very same role he plays in Enoch. I have to be honest that these scrolls are broken, that whole lines are missing, that scholars reconstruct and dispute them, and I will not build a mountain on a fragment. But the plain fact is remarkable enough on its own. The people who lived closest to the wilderness of the scapegoat, in the very desert where the goat was driven, kept Azazel's name alive in their library as a fallen angel, a source of corruption, a figure of the coming judgment. The desert remembered its resident, which brings us back at last to the two goats and to the thing the whole film has been walking toward. And that is why the holiest day in the Bible has a demon standing at the far end of it. Not because Israel worshipped Azazel, it never did. Not because the goat was a sacrifice to him, an offering, a gift. The text is careful, and so am I. The goat for Azazel was never killed as a sacrifice on an altar the way the Lord's goat was. It was a removal, a sending away, a carrying off of filth to the place filth belongs. Azazel does not receive worship in this ritual. He receives garbage. He receives the sin he authored, thrown back at him across the wilderness, year after year. A permanent annual reminder that heaven has assigned the corruption of the world to him and will keep returning it to his address until the last day. Understand that distinction, because it is the whole moral difference, and the ancient writers were careful about it even when we are not. To sacrifice to a being is to bow to it, to feed it, to acknowledge it as a power that must be appeased. Israel did none of that with Azazel. It did the opposite. It treated him the way you treat a condemned prisoner when you deliver his own crime back to his cell. There is no reverence in it, no fear that must be bought off, no altar, no blood offered up to him. There is only the grim, almost contemptuous act of returning the poison to the one who brewed it. The goat for the Lord is lifted up in worship. The goat for Azazel is thrown out in judgment. One is an offering, the other is an eviction, and the same ceremony contains both, because atonement, in this ancient vision, was never only about drawing near to God. It was also about driving the darkness back to where it came from, all the way out, past the last booth, to the jagged cliff, to the pit, to Him. And that is the final turn, the one that ties the ritual to the very last clause of the sentence, the clause I ask you to keep from the second act. Remember what heaven said would happen to Azazel at the end. And on the day of the great judgment, he shall be cast into the fire. The desert now, the fire later. The binding is only the holding cell. And so every year when the goat carried the year's sin out to him in the wilderness, it was not only remembering the first binding, it was pointing forward to the day when the accumulated corruption of the whole world and the one who taught it would be gathered up and cast finally into the fire. The scapegoat walked toward the pit, and the pit itself was only waiting for the flame. And I want you to feel the strange mercy hidden inside that arrangement, because it is easy to hear all of this as pure horror and miss the shape of hope buried in it. The reason there could be a day of atonement at all, the reason the people could be made clean year after year, is precisely that the corruption had somewhere to go. Sin was not simply forgiven into thin air. It was named, gathered, laid on a body, and returned to its author, sent back to the one who had introduced it into the world, so that the people could be free of it. In a terrible way, Azazel bound in the desert was necessary to the whole design. He was the place the darkness could be sent. He was the far country where the guilt could be exiled, so that the near country, the camp, the sanctuary, the people could be clean. The pit in the wilderness was, if you like, the drain of the world, and the ritual was the annual washing, and the two only worked together. That is why heaven bound him rather than destroying him at once. A destroyed Azazel is just an ending. A bound Azazel, waiting in the desert for the fire, is an address, a destination, a place to send the sin of a guilty people so that they can go on living. The most disturbing figure in the whole story turns out to be load-bearing, and that too is the kind of thing this channel exists to sit with, because it is the sort of dark, strange, and honest idea that the smoothed-over retellings always leave out. And the Book of Enoch does not leave the fire as a bare threat either. Enoch is shown it. In his journeys through the ends of the earth and the secret places of creation, the scribe is carried to the place prepared for the fallen, and he sees it, and he describes it, and it is one of the most desolate visions in all of ancient literature. He is shown a place with neither a heaven above nor a firm earth beneath, a chaos of empty space, and there, he says, he saw the stars of heaven bound together, the ones that had transgressed, and he asks the angel with him for what sin they are bound, and he is told that these are the ones who overstep the command of God, and they are held here until the mystery of their appointed time is fulfilled, 10,000 years, the time of their sin, 10,000 years in the emptiness, and then the fire. It is the same sentence Azazel received, written large across the whole company of the fallen, the binding first and the burning at the end, and Enoch walks through it with his own eyes and comes back down to warn the world. So the fire that waits at the end of Azazel's story is not a rumor in the text. It is a place the seventh man was taken to see, so that he could carry the warning home. Hold that, because it is one more reason the man who went up and the angel who went down belong in the same story, and one more thread pulling you toward the next film. Enoch saw where Azazel is going. He stood at the edge of the fire, and lived, and came back to tell it. And before I gather the whole of it, I want to bring him out of the desert and into your own life for a moment, because the ancient world would insist on it, and because it is the reason the story is not a museum piece. Look at what Azazel was blamed for. Not sorcery, which stayed in the temples. Not astrology, which stayed with the priests. He was blamed for the two things that went out to every single human being and never came back, the weapon and the mirror. And now look around you. We are, right now, the richest civilization in the history of the earth, and we spend more of our treasure on weapons than on almost anything else we make. Whole economies organized around the perfection of the sword, the descendants of Azazel's first blade grown into machines that can unmake a city in an afternoon. That is one of his teachings, still being taught, still the largest industry on the planet, and the other one. Consider that a person today may look into a glass many hundreds of times in a single day. Not a polished bronze mirror, but a lit screen that shows them their own face, and then 1,000 other faces to measure it against. that entire fortunes are built on the ancient hunger Azazel is said to have kindled, the need to be looked at, the fear of not being beautiful enough, the endless painting and comparing and displaying of the human body as an object to be ranked. The eyes darkened with antimony have become the eyes lit by a screen, but it is the same lesson, the same wound, the treating of the human person as a surface to be improved and desired. The ancient world traced both of those all the way back to one fallen teacher on a mountain, and whether or not you believe an angel came down and taught it, you cannot deny that the two things he was blamed for are the two things that most define and most torment the world you are living in tonight. That is why they could not forget him, because they could not get free of him. And in a strange way, neither can we. And here is the part that should raise the hair on your arms, because it is not ancient at all. The ritual is gone. The temple was burned, the priesthood scattered. The two goats and the cliff and the scarlet wool have not been seen in nearly 2,000 years. But the day is not gone. The Day of Atonement is still, right now, the holiest day in the Jewish year, kept every autumn by millions of people who fast and confess and stand before God exactly as their ancestors did, minus the one thing the temple made possible, the sacrifice. And every year, on a fixed cycle of readings that has turned for centuries, the congregation comes around again to the 16th chapter of the Book of Leviticus, and it is read aloud, in the hearing of everyone, the whole ancient ceremony recited as memory and as longing, which means that once a year, in synagogues all over the world, the name is still spoken, the lots, the two goats, one for the Lord and one for Azazel. The name of the desert power did not vanish with the temple. It is still read out every single year on the holiest day in front of people who mostly have no idea that the strange word they just heard is the name of a fallen angel bound under the rocks in the wilderness. The goat no longer walks, but the name still gets its yearly hearing, carried forward on the tongue of a people who have never stopped keeping the day, even after they lost the power to complete it. The thread stopped turning white, and the temple fell, and still, once a year, someone stands up and reads the name Azazel into the air. He has not been quietly forgotten. In all the long centuries since, the name has kept its yearly hearing. Hold that beside everything else you have heard tonight, and then let me gather the whole of it. So who was Azazel, really? Let me gather it the honest way, with the seams showing. He was, in the Book of Enoch, one of the 200 watchers who came down on Mount Hermon, the second among them, the teacher, the one who opened the armory and the jewel box and taught the human race to forge the blade and paint the eye, war and vanity, the fear of death and the hunger to be desired. And because those two teachings never died, because they are still here in every hand and on every face, the book laid the corruption of the whole earth at his feet and said, "To him ascribe all sin." He was bound, hand and foot, and buried in an opening in the desert called Dudael, under rough and jagged rocks, with his face covered so he could never see light, to abide there forever, until the day of the great judgment when he will be cast into the fire. And his name, carried in that ancient and living tradition, surfaced in the law of Moses itself, in the 16th chapter of Leviticus, over one of two goats on the Day of Atonement, one lot for the Lord and one lot for Azazel, so that every year the sin of the nation was confessed unto a living body and driven out into the wilderness, toward the jagged rocks, toward the pit, toward him. That is what the two texts say when you set them side by side. The scholars debate the etymology, and I have given you the debate honestly. They debate whether the Leviticus Azazel and the Enoch Azazel are truly one figure, and I have given you that debate too, and told you the demon reading cannot be proven and cannot be explained away. But the picture that keeps assembling itself out of the actual words, no matter how carefully you handle them, is the same picture. A fallen teacher, a desert prison, a nation's sin sent home to him once a year, and a fire waiting at the end of the world. And I want to leave you with the thing that unsettles me most, the thing that is larger than any argument about vowels or canon. It is this: the people who wrote the law of Moses did not have to put that name in the text. They could have said, "Send the goat away into the wilderness," and stopped. They did not. They wrote a name that stood in parallel with the name of their own God, a name that the fuller tradition attached to a fallen angel bound in the desert, and they set it at the exact center of their holiest day, and they never fully explained it, as if they assumed the reader already knew the darker story that lay behind it. They left the door open on purpose, and through that door, the whole world of the watchers pours into the pages of the accepted scripture. The oath on the mountain, the forbidden teaching, the giants, the blood, the binding in the desert, all of it standing behind a single unexplained word in a chapter about goats. Read Leviticus, the 16th chapter, again, knowing what you now know, and the floor will move under you the way I promised it would, because you will see that the holiest ritual of the ancient world had, standing in the desert at the far end of it, an angel with his face covered, waiting in the dark. We have stood on this mountain before, you and I. In the very first story this channel ever told, we climbed the summit of Mount Hermon and we watched 200 of them swear the oath and come down, and tonight we followed one of them, the second, the teacher, all the way to the bottom of his story, into the pit in the desert and into the 16th chapter of Leviticus, and we found that his sentence never really ended, that the world has been sending its sin back to him once a year, for as long as there was a temple to do it in. If you have not seen that first story, the full account of the Watchers and their oath and the origin of the demons that still walk the earth, it is waiting for you the moment this ends, and it is the ground everything tonight was built on, and it will change the way you hear the word Watcher forever. But there is one more door, and it is the brightest one in the whole hallway, and we have only touched its edge tonight. Because think about who carried the verdict down to Azazel. Think about the one human being in this entire story who did not fall, who was not bound, who was instead taken up, alive, out of the world of men and into the heavens, and shown the courses of the stars and the storehouses of the winds and the throne itself, and sent back down carrying what he had seen, Enoch, the seventh man, the scribe who walked with God and was not, for God took him. Next we follow him up. We go through the heavens he passed through, one after another, all the way to the throne room at the top, and we find out what a human being saw when he was carried into the presence of God, and why he came back down afraid. The lost books are a long hallway, and every door opens onto another. Stay and walk the rest of it with me. And when you go up that hallway with Enoch, into the heavens, remember where you started tonight, because it will make the height mean something. Remember that the story of the ascent and the story of the pit are the same story told from opposite ends. One man was carried up, alive, into the light, and shown the secrets and trusted to bring them home. One angel was thrown down, bound into the dark, and buried under the rocks with his face covered so the light could never reach him. Up and down, light and dark, the scribe and the prisoner, and the whole drama of the lost books stretched between them like a rope. Tonight we followed the rope down, all the way down, into the desert of Dudael and the 16th chapter of Leviticus, and the cliff where the goat was cast among the jagged rocks. Next time we follow it up. But first, go back to the mountain, to the oath, to the 200, because everything you heard tonight began there, in the days of the man whose name means the descent, when the ones who should have stayed in the light came down into the dark, and one of them never came back out. His name was Azazel, and once a year, for as long as there was a temple to do it in, an entire nation remembered exactly where he was and sent its sins to find